Hey friend, welcome to Authentic Performance, the podcast. My name is Nat and I'm your host. At Authentic Performance, our mission is to provide education and advocacy for all athletes, developing awareness surrounding identity, purpose, and health, so athletes can live well beyond their sport. This week, our guest is Cory Camp. Cory is a former Division I swimmer and the founder of Forever Athlete. He has written a book to help athletes connect with their true identity and continues to provide support and resources, especially for retired athletes. He's also the host of the Forever Athlete radio podcast. Cory considers himself a connector, creator, and community curator. We had a great conversation about the transition out of sport, identity, and flow state. This episode is full of wisdom, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Enjoy the conversation. All right. Thank you so much, Cory, for being here. It's a pleasure to meet you virtually and just have you here on the podcast. So just to get started, I want to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you're involved in sports, what you do now, what that looks like.
Heck yeah. Well, Matt, thanks again for having me. I think it's always awesome to be able to flip the microphone around and actually be hosted on another podcast. I've been in heavy reflection mode lately and coming up on 4 years of Forever Athlete Radio, which is the podcast that I host. So it's unique when every time I have an opportunity to be on the other side, I just relish it because yeah, I'm always telling other people's stories. It's fun to sit and tell mine occasionally. So for those not familiar with who I am and what I do, I like to say I'm a community builder, connector, and a creator that shows up through the work that I do at my company, Forever Athlete, which is really about honoring where you've been in your life while supporting you holistically and where you want to go in that next chapter. Oftentimes it shows up in working with former athletes, helping them transition to whatever is next in their life beyond sport. That got started because I grew up swimming, and I feel like a lot of athletes can relate to this. That was really the playground at which I started to get to know who I was. It's where I developed a sense of self-worth, an identity, a confidence. And I always joke, I was like, if people knew me at 12, 14, 15 years old, if they knew me in swimming world, they saw me as this confident, goofy kid that just had this joy of life. But if they knew me any other areas, they knew me as kind of this timid, shy guy that just kind of kept to himself. And it was only through the lens of sport that I really felt like I could fully express myself. So that continued to develop over the years. I got really good at the sport, ended up swimming Division I at University of Delaware, and had some success there. It was a fun time. And then when it was over, it like came crashing down like a pile of bricks on my head of who the heck am I? And truthfully, I've been spending the past number of years answering that question and in turn just sharing what has come up for me and sharing my story and experience in a way that allows other people to start asking better questions of themselves a little bit sooner so that they don't have quite as hard of a transition, oh shoot moment, look in the mirror, and they don't recognize who they are.
Yeah, I love that. I have a very similar experience. My college basketball career lasted a year, about a year, right during COVID, and had a back injury that ended it all. And I remember just being like, I have no idea who I am because this identity has just taken over everything that I am. And so I think that the transition out of sport is obviously super important. I just did some research on the transition from high school to college athletics and some of like the factors that go into that. But I think that other transition is quite a big one as well. Obviously, figuring out what you're gonna do after that
Yeah,
big piece of your life is gone.
and it's less studied. From what I found, there's not as much hard research and facts around it, and I think there's a multitude of factors in that. One being like if you're transitioning, if you're looking at the two different ways or two different ends of that spectrum, if you're transitioning from high school into college, you still have this holistic version of support around you with the athletic department and what resources are available to you. Um, and because of that, there's going to be a lot more of an emphasis of, okay, what is going on? We care about this transition, and it's a kind of harsh reality, but you quickly realize like you're not the NCAA or your school's problem anymore once you're no longer wearing that jersey. And athletes feel that in different ways. I'm sure like even year two, year three, if you're going through it and you're injured, and it's like, oh, the school doesn't pay for my Tylenol anymore, or the doctor's visit, I have to come out of pocket for that. Oh,
Hmm.
okay, yeah, this feels different, even though you're still at the university, like you're still
Yeah.
paying to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why what you're doing is so important, obviously, is kind of bridging the gap, especially afterwards, providing that support. I think that's huge because, like you said, it's not the same as the support that you would get going from high school to college athletics.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's looking at. I've I've spent the past 3 years trying to simplify while also being really creative of how we can actually provide a solution here, right? And it's not as complex as I think at least how I thought it would originally be. When you really boil it down to things, what we're all seeking is a feeling of meaning behind what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. We're seeking to feel seen, heard, and understood, which often comes as a byproduct of if our daily actions have meaning behind them. That is a box that is checked there. And we want to feel a part of something bigger than ourselves. That's what makes sports this sacred and special playground for so many of us as athletes. But it's not limited to just sport. That's just where you get your first introduction and taste of it. And I think what I'm trying to do and have done is allowing people to shift their perspective and see that those three things can be accomplished beyond just the sporting world. Yes, it shows up differently in sports. You're not going to have the same number of eyeballs on you. Like I sat down with a buddy of mine who is the number three contender boxer in the world, fought in a heavyweight or light heavyweight championship bout, and we agreed. It's like, yeah, he's not going to have this opportunity to fight in Madison Square Garden with tens of thousands of people in person watching him and millions on pay per view watching. But that doesn't mean what he's doing now is any less meaningful. It's on him to be able to just shift that perspective and find that in the day to day actions. And who cares if less eyeballs are on you? Like that, the number of eyeballs don't equate to higher worth or higher validation.
Yeah, I mean, and I think again that's obviously contributed to what you're doing now, and I feel the same way. Like I knew I wanted to study psychology when I was in school early on, but it was only after my injury that I was like, no, I want to be working with athletes. Like that's the population, and I think that's super common in a lot of different ways. I know I just talked to one of my best friends. She has an autoimmune disease, and now
Mm.
she wants to, well, she's going into occupational therapy, but she's been doing personal training because like exercise and nutrition is basically what has been her healing and her, managing her symptoms. So it's so cool to see how, some of these things that we're part of, and even the challenges are kind of what translate into what we find meaning in afterwards. Like obviously you saw firsthand what it was like to go through that transition, and so now you can have more of an impact on, people that are going through it.
Yeah, I think it's just whether it be through the conversations that I've had with other athletes now at this point, whether it would be just informal like this on a podcast or in a more formal setting of doing one-to-one life coaching with them and my own experience. It's just you see that what I've tried to create and build was what I had so much trouble finding when it first stopped. And so for context, like I said, I had some success at Delaware. I went in freshman year, was the already the fastest on the team in my events. By sophomore year, I had more school records than I could count in events that you could swim in a conference championship meet. I was MVP and I scored the most points on the team all 4 years. And it was even in that my senior year went from that early on career success to still contributing, but not to the best of my own ability. Like my last race ever, I will never forget touching the wall and seeing my time and just heart sinking, being like, wow, that's slower than I was 6 years ago in high school. That's embarrassing. Like, that's how I'm going to be remembered. And I remember just turning immediately to anger in that moment and being like, I'm done with this sport. Forget it. Like, this is this was a waste of time. Why did I do this my senior year? I should have walked away sooner. Because every athlete wants to walk away from their sport on their terms and have that ride off into the sunset moment. And when you have any other exit less than that, you can't help but feel a little bit of anger around it. And I'm sure like a piece of you was probably upset about the injury for a while. And we have every right to be angry towards it, but it's a point of diminishing returns eventually where that anger and holding on to that resentment towards it will actually be what's preventing you from what you're actually after in the bigger picture of things. And it took me a while to realize that. I searched for answers in a lot of the wrong places, a lot of the places that I thought was easy. Like I picked up drinking as if that became my new sport and became super good at that, so to speak, or at least I thought. And I thought that's how I was going to be validating and meeting new friends through it. And then I quickly realized it was like, oh, these people around me, they only care about me because I can finish a fifth before I go to the bar with them. And I'm impressing them with how much I can drink. But deep down, I am actually miserable. And I'm just doing this because I don't like my current reality and it's not meeting my current expectation of where I thought I would be. So I'm going to escape it instead of sitting in that and feeling what I needed to feel and starting to ask myself better questions of, well, like, okay, I don't like where I'm at right now. How do I change that? How do I change my expectation? Do I need to humble myself and be okay with not being the most successful person in the room because I wasn't used to that feeling for quite some time? I let my success in the pool really just drive my ego and who I thought I was or viewed myself as, to a point of where that had diminishing returns. I would argue it's okay. We are meant to be successful. We were designed to have success and we are meant to have that as a blessing, but we're also not meant to ever lose sight of why that was put into our life in the first place. And I find myself guilty of that often. And I think that's a common human flaw. It's very easy to lose sight and be like, oh, well, I'm self-made. I did all this. It's like, no, it was never ours to begin with, but it was gifted to us in a way that if we allow, we can continue to show up and let that be our worship and let that be like honestly the highest form of praise for what was gifted to us in the first place. And then it creates this positive feedback loop. But it's that constant tug of staying humble in those high moments and staying hungry in those low moments as well. Of like, okay, this isn't gonna last forever.
Yeah, I love that. I know on your social media with Forever Athlete, like you've talked about the addiction of like being an athlete. And so I think it's interesting that sometimes that turns into, you know, abusing alcohol or other things too that are just not a healthy coping mechanism. So what do you think that looks like to kind of shift from that addiction per se to your sport into something that's like helpful for us?
I think it looks like sitting with yourself, whether that be solo with a pen and like I got my journal here. Like I've literally filled up half this thing in the past month alone because it's been a heavy reflection period for me lately. And I always say like proactive reflection hits way different than reactive reflection. And that goes, every athlete knows that. You don't want to be playing on your heels because when you play on your heels, you're screwed. You're playing from behind, you're playing from a place of lack, and you're playing from this place of I need to force a play, I need to make something happen to turn momentum in my favor. And that never ever works out, right? Like, the moment that you feel that and you've recognized that that's happened for an extended period of time, the game's over. You've lost. You might as well just pack things up and try again the next time out there. And so what I've noticed, it really boils down to what is the underlying intention behind what it is that you're doing. And when it comes from a place of lack, a place of insecurity, maybe you're anxious, maybe you're depressed, it's often as a result of some underlying need and a part of you is not being met. And recognizing, allowing a pause long enough so that you can actually sit and differentiate between, is this actually what I want right now? Or is this just an immediate addressing fix to the need that I have? And oftentimes it's that quick lash out that is a younger, more mature part of us that is gravitating towards something that won't actually serve us and get us closer to where we ultimately want to go in the long run. Now, that's obviously easier said than done, right? And what I noticed was, like, I didn't actually need the alcohol. Like, I'm 2.5 years sober now at this point. I don't know if my relationship with alcohol will be complete black and white, totally sober for the rest of my life. All I know is I needed to create enough space from it at this point in my life where I could clearly differentiate between, why am I grabbing this in the first place? What is the intention? When the intention behind it was to escape my reality, it was to, oh, I needed this to be confident to talk to someone, whether that be girls out in public, or I needed to have something in my hand to feel comfortable in a social situation, then yeah, no, I shouldn't be gravitating that, because I'm gonna lean so heavily on that I'm not actually doing the work. It becomes a crutch. Whereas the goal for me is eventually to be able to turn to that and say, no, that's actually, it was introduced to us for a reason. Like, that can be something that I can celebrate with one. And I'm still learning personally, like, how to make that happen. But I think athletes as a whole, I mean, it's tough to generalize an entire population, right? Like, that's stereotyping for sure. But if you look at it, it's based off of how sport, especially at the elite levels, is taught. And I think culturally, this is starting to shift in a way that's positive. But it's like, you have to be all in and dedicated to this thing, otherwise you won't be successful. And there's some truth in that, but you can be committed to something, but while also not worshiping that thing, letting that be the end all be all of who you are and who you were designed to be. And so it's taking that time away to recognize, maybe I need clear boundaries here. Maybe I need to explore other hobbies, whatever that is. Um, but yeah, it's taking that time away, I think, is the biggest piece that has helped me and that I've seen help other people. Like, I'm a big advocate now of not total sobriety, but 60 days of sober curious lifestyle living. Try it out. Like, remove it for 60 days, evaluate your relationship with it, and then build a healthier one from there, because it's in space that we often get the most clarity.
Yeah, for sure. I love that you talk about being proactive too, because I think that's huge. And I know a lot of times, especially with that transition, it's like, whether it's, planned or unplanned. Like in my case, it was completely out of my control. But even for athletes that go there 4 years or, whatever, and then they're done, I think you don't even sometimes start to think about what's life is going to look like after until you're already there. So how do you think athletes who are, still in school, still in their sport, can be kind of almost preparing, not in a negative way of like, oh, I'm just
Yeah.
preparing for the end, but also kind of equipping themselves to have the skills to positively cope afterwards, so it's not just that reaction to, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah. Bear with me for a second. So I think it boils down to being able to find flow in your life. That's the end all goal of all athletes. You're familiar with it when you're on fire in the zone in your game, right? When you're throwing up shots and you can't miss, life is good. And the common misconception is that flow is limited to our sport, because that's where we experience it the most. Now, athletes are athletes for a reason, especially at a high level, because often they found what's called their primary flow activity. We all have activities in our lives where flow becomes, it just comes naturally to us. Like at this point, I'm 6, 7 years removed from swimming, but I'm going to find flow a lot easier if I get back in the pool later on this afternoon than someone who's never swam before in their life, because guess what? I've put a bunch of hours and time and work into that. But it's starting to realize that flow can be created in other areas of our life. And in fact, it should be created in other areas of our life. Because what happens if you only ever focus on your primary flow activity, it's like having one key to your house. And that's cool until one day the key gets taken away from you. You get robbed, you get injured, it's out of your control, you got to medically retire. Now you're trying to go home, you're trying to find flow and fulfillment in your life, and you're like, what the heck? I lost my keys. Someone stole it from me. This was wrongfully taken. And so when you only focus on developing one set of key, then yes, it's going to be really challenging. Now, how do we create buy-in to actually, quote unquote, give a shit about creating spare keys while you're still playing? It's recognizing that the more flow you get, it carries over into other areas of your life. It's not separate silos, but rather it's all one big representation of who you are at your core. And so you can start to realize that, oh, if I spend some time sitting with and then intentionally carrying out other areas of my life where I can find this feeling of flow, my performance on the court increases. It actually becomes easier. I'm more balanced. The other visual that I like to give, it's like if you have a bar stool and you have 4 legs on the ground, you're way more likely to, like, basketball happens, something happens there, and that leg gets thrown off into the air. You can still find your balance with the other 3 legs because you're rooted in finding flow in 3 other diverse areas of who you are and in your life. But if you're only ever balancing on that one thing, it's way easier to get tipped over. So that's really where it begins, is starting to recognize that you can and you should invest your time, energy, and effort into other things, because it's actually in that diversification that you're improving your current level of performance. I'll give an example of this. I mentored a kid that was on my club team growing up. He's a number of years younger than me. And he reached out a few years back and was like, I'm really struggling I'm feeling just burnt out. He swims in college. And I was like, I'm feeling really burnt out. I just don't have the same passion and love for the sport. I said, okay, what do you want to do about that? Do you want to walk away from the sport? And he said, no, I still feel like there's unfinished business here, but it's just not firing up. And the hard work actually feels like really, really hard work. When you're in flow, when hard work feels easy and it leaves you this is tiring, but I'm not tired. I can keep going. And so we started to peel it back and said, okay, common misconception is default, let's pour more into the swimming world. Obviously, something's not clicking, so we need to do more of that. And instead, it's pumping the brakes and saying, okay, that's not working. Why are we going to double down on what's not working? Why don't we start to take a 30,000-foot view? What other hobbies do you have? What else do you enjoy? It's it sounds crazy, but I enjoy figure skating. I said, cool. I think that's awesome. Go figure skate once or twice a week. And it wasn't he figure skated once and everything was solved. But over the course of 6 months, it helped that it was the off season too. He was able to find a friend group, a support group, and find flow on the ice. And that carried over to this newfound sense of passion and love again for the sport. He was able to recommit to what he fell in love with in the first place. And that's only because he allowed himself to be open to considering a different possibility, a different solution. And that's where it's tough because, sports culture is, oh, if you do anything outside of your sport, you're not focused. You're not taking this seriously enough. How dare you have hobbies? I say, how dare you stop me from having hobbies? Because hobbies are what actually makes me a better player, and I'm going to have something to build off of afterwards too. It's all about our life is just about laying this constant foundation at which we can continue to build brick by brick and expand upon.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's cool to hear too that like the diversity is important of like getting into different things. I want to shift just a little bit and talk about the community aspect because I know like that's a big part of what you do, and thinking about kind of that, you know, broad aspect of like finding different things. I feel like it's also cool to find different people even outside your sport. Like, for
Hmm.
example, my brother plays football at Harvard. He's around his football guys all the time, but he's also been able to find community outside of that in some of his classes and people who are, you know, not directly involved in the sport, which I think is also valuable because then, you know, once that sport is done, you know, those people that are there, not that you can't obviously continue to have that community with them, and they will probably understand what you're going through more than some people,
Mm.
but then you also have different groups of people that will probably help you get involved in different things as well. I mean, I can see that being valuable.
Yeah, I was about to say there's one person can't be everything for anyone. That's just the plain truth. And we weren't designed to be that. We weren't made to be that. That's a burden that no human was created to carry. And so when you recognize that, you realize, okay, great. I don't have to do this. I don't have to rely. Same thing. Like I can't rely on my partner or even my best friend or my parents to be everything for me. That's not their role. But recognizing that again, you can diversify that out allows you to find support in different areas and it allows you to meet your needs in different ways. It's like, yeah, certain needs can only be met by your parents. Certain needs can only be met by a partner. Certain needs can only be met by teammates. And when you start to identify, okay, well, what needs do I have and where can I get those met? Then you can start to diversify your communities and the people that you're intentionally spending your time with. The challenge when you're in it in sports still is what is default easy? Default easy is your teammates. I mean, I walked onto campus and I had 27 guys that were my friend. They had to be my friend because I was on the team with them and I was going to see them not just 20 plus hours a week, but I'm going to be living with some of them and I'm going to be going to the dining hall with them. And it's easy to do life with all of them, right? And yes, that's good, but it's also good to have something outside of that. Sometimes you need people around you that have absolutely no idea what you do and how good you are at it. And that is that humble piece that allows you to then be like, oh, yeah, it's like not the worst thing in the world. Like, for example, my parents love them both equally to death. My dad swam in college, so and he's a coach still to this day. So he has a much different lens and expectation of my performance as a swimmer over the years when I was growing up. My mom can swim, but like no real like concept or understanding of performance to a degree. She obviously like got better the more she followed and supported me. But I loved her heart. I'll never forget like one meet sitting in the car, and she was the one who had took me to the meet and taken me home. We're driving back, and I was like 30 seconds off my mile time. Like it in my head, I was like, this was the worst performance in the world. My mom was like, it's only 30 seconds. Like it's not that bad. And I found myself initial reaction to be like, what does she know? Like she doesn't know how bad that is. It's like if you're a 30 point per game scorer and you go out and score 2 points, you'd be obviously pretty pissed at how you showed up in that game. But I just loved her heart and the pureness of it. And I realized now in that moment, like she was validating me and seeing me for me and who I actually am, not for me as the swimmer. And in her eyes, that was enough. And it was recognizing that I could let go of that performance and go back to practice the next day and say, okay, yesterday less than ideal, but we're back to the drawing board, and I can recommit to this process, knowing that I have this unconditional love and support behind me, and that's so powerful. And that's still available to us now. Like we just need to actively seek out and be intentional. I look at one of the social skills that athletes, quite frankly, suck at unless they're intentional behind it is that avenue of making friends after sport. Because if you look at your peers in college, everyone goes through that learning curve freshman year. And they have it within the condition of a university typically, right? So it is a little bit easier, but they have a leg up on us because they actually have to go out and talk to the people in their dorms. They have to talk to people in their classes and make friends and join Greek life or whatever it may be. Whereas athletes, you're just given a lot of those things. And so there's a relearning process where not only are you learning what am I beyond sport, what job am I going to do and career path do I need to take, but you're also learning social skills that a lot of your peers have a 4 year head start or 5 year head start on you. And so it's recognizing that like, hey, there's value in putting intention behind cultivating that skill and recognizing don't beat yourself up if you are 4 years behind your peers in it. Give yourself some grace in it. Like making it harder on yourself only harms you.
Yeah. So with Forever Athlete, what are some of the ways that you try to, I guess, help former athletes or just whoever you're working with kind of building that community? What does that look like practically for people that are seeking it, actively?
Yeah, it's providing them actual experience, realizing that people are lazy and that like unless you actually take them to water and have them drink, they're often going to be like, oh, like it doesn't exist out there. It's like, no, it exists out there, but it also requires proactive work on the community side of things. Like I always tell people, I'm like, you have to be willing to work with me for this to work. I will not take someone, I will never go on like a sales call, or I don't even call them sales calls because I'm like, I'm not selling you anything. I'm just presenting you options. And if you're enrolled, awesome, we're going to rock and we're going to go through with this. And how it looks tangibly, it's like, yes, like it shows up in, I do everything from one-on-one performance coaching, life coaching, to throwing free community events here in Austin. And like how it showed up this past weekend, I threw an adult field day where we're playing dodgeball, we're playing water balloon toss, sack races, like capture the flag, tug of war, all of the things that you're like, this is freaking awesome. It makes me feel like a kid again. And that's very intentional. It wasn't like I just went on Pinterest and said, what games are we going to play today? Like every game and the layout was designed in a way to inspire connection, to inspire people to work together again, to feel like a part of something bigger than themselves. So what we're doing is we're allowing opportunities to be created, to exist in local communities so that athletes can feel like a part of something bigger than themselves, that they can forget for a second the stress of their job or not having a job. Like I had someone reach out to me the other day and he just texted me after I do a Wednesday morning like workout and games every week here. And he messaged me and he's like, dude, that really meant a lot to me. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, man, of course. Like, thanks for coming out. And he goes, no, like I've really been struggling lately. I got laid off 2, 3 months ago. The job search, man, is weared me down. I was exhausted. And for 45 minutes, I forgot about that for a second. I was like, dude, man, wow, thank you for letting me know because that continues to motivate me to provide these spaces that it's not about making a ton of money. It's not about building a giant empire or brand, but it's truthfully just easing the access to true, genuine community. And that happens through accessibility, happens through a consistent cadence of events and experiences. And then it happens through allowing like I'm just a natural connector. So I love learning about people and saying, okay, Nat, you played college basketball and this is your career. Great. I talked with so and so a few weeks ago. I'm going to connect you with her and you guys are going to be best friends. And you're going to be like, that's so weird. Like, I don't know. And I'm like, don't think too much about it. Just trust me. Go have that coffee. Go have a conversation because you truly never know what conversation will mean for someone else. And it could be life altering in a lot of ways. So I'm just about increasing that likelihood of inspiring those connections to be able to happen.
Yeah, and I love that, these things that you're doing so intentionally almost, they mimic a lot of the same feelings that we do get in our sport. Like obviously,
Mhm.
like even saying, I want these games to make us feel like a kid again. Like I know, especially for me in my college career, there were times when I was like, why did I even start playing? I started playing when I was, third, fourth grade, and I loved it back then, and it was so fun. And then you get to the point where you've got practice twice a day, and you're trying to balance homework and friends and everything, and it makes you question, why did I really start that? But I think going back to that, childlike joy of, this is where it all started for me. Even if it's not specifically in that sport, but just like at this, field day, I think that's so valuable that people can kind of revert back to that time where maybe that it really got started.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest disservice that we can do to ourselves is thinking that we're too successful, too busy, too important to include play in our life. That's simply that. It's the catch-22 of sports is you fall in love with the thing because it allows you this playground of just self-discovery, and you get to do things that you've never done before, and you are like impressing and surprising and wowing yourself, and you're learning about who you are in that process. And then somewhere along the line, a coach, an organization, a cultural situation comes in and says, okay, that was cute that you did that in the past. Now it's time to get serious. Now that you're getting paid, you need to start treating this as a profession, not a playground. And I would argue they're one and the same. It just is the coolest thing in the world that you get paid to do what you love, that you get paid to play a freaking game out there. And it's the organizations that don't lose sight of that that are going to be the most successful in the long run. I love watching Steph Curry shoot a basketball. Yes, is he elite and like pure excellence in what he does? Yes. Does he take it seriously? Does he work hard? Yes. But that dude has more fun on that court than most people in any environment or arena that they find themselves in. You know what I mean? Like, it's so cool to watch him hit a game winner and then tongue go out and shimmy and like the celebration. And you're like, he's been doing that since he was probably 8 years old on the blacktop, doing the same thing. He's never lost sight of that kid in him. And so many of us lose sight of that kid inside of us and say, no, it's not appropriate for him or her to show up in this moment. And I would argue that it always is. That all parts of us are who we are. They make up who we are at our core. And they need to have a seat at the table, an invitation into the discussion. And that becomes on us we're always called to allow that to happen. It's on us if we will be open and surrender to that or not.
Yeah, for sure. And I think honestly, I think this is the same way in a lot of different realms with like I'm super into like the mental skills of like how we can build that into team atmospheres and how that can be pushed, but a lot of times you don't get the buy-in from coaches, and it's the same way that you're saying, it's all business. But I think if coaches and organizations could understand the impact that this has on performance, there would be more of a support to like, okay, we need to incorporate some, team retreats where we're just going and enjoying ourselves. Like you're going to be able to build more as a team and individually if you can, do that. Obviously, we're talking about flow state, like that is directly related to performance. Like it's not just a fun thing to add in there. Like it is good to have that joy, but I think the impact it has on performance should be seen as more of an asset, to a program.
Yeah, 100%. It allows you to trust your teammates, your coaches, and the environment that you're in. And when there's psychological safety, which is often a byproduct of, you have more of that, the more flow experiences that you have collectively and individually. You feel psychologically safe to then take risks and go work hard, right? So yeah, the more you create buy-in, one, by throwing them through the experience and letting them feel and see the result. And it's tough from a psychological mental skills perspective, right? Because what you're enrolling them in and trying to create buy-in in isn't a directly tangible thing. It's not, I'm selling you a pair of basketball shoes that are guaranteed going to increase your vertical by an inch or two. It's, hey, I'm actually going to I'm going to sell you something that who knows what it will do, but there's actually like unexplicable results on the other end of it if you're 100% bought in. And it requires 100% buy-in. It's not a box to check. It's not something that you just sit there. Like I didn't take visualization seriously as a kid growing up. I loved visualization. The like 2 weeks that my coach would introduce it before championship meet in high school, because it meant 10 minutes of nap time after practice. I was like, that's awesome. We have 10 minutes less of dry land exercise and we get to lay on a mat and close our eyes. I'm 100% falling asleep for this. But then it wasn't until later on in my life that I realized, oh, like this actually plays like such a critical role in my performance. And truth be told, I shouldn't just be doing it 2 weeks out from the championship performance. It's something that I should be doing, quite frankly, almost every day. It's tough to create that buy-in because it's not something you can put your hands on. It's not a direct result that you had it's not a 1-to-1 equals 2. It's actually a 1-to-1 equals what the heck? I don't know. Like it's infinite possibility. And you can get really excited about infinite possibility. And that should be what fires up these coaches, athletes, and people involved in sport. And that's why you can notice it even just in the tone of my voice as I talk about it. Cause I'm like, it sounds like I'm crazy, but there's so much like possibility on there that I can't even fathom it. If I try to put it into words, it's actually going to do it a disservice.
Yeah, no, for sure. I just hope that, I mean, I think we're getting closer, like obviously, to having that awareness of the importance of these things. But I mean, obviously, there's still a long way to go, and just hopefully making that a priority. Just as I think I was just talking to another friend who also played college basketball, and she said, you train your body, but what about training our mind? Like it's just like another muscle that we should be training, and yet it often gets put to the back burner. And just the physical training is so emphasized, but we forget about that other piece that a lot of times has more of an impact on our performance than how much how fast we ran our lines or how many shots we put up.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to this conversation of compassion towards making strides to be better, right? As an athlete, you would maybe be upset, but you couldn't really blame yourself if you got injured because you showed up to preseason completely out of shape. You didn't work out for 3 months, and on first or second practice back, you pushed it and you got hurt. You'd be like, yeah, it makes sense. It still sucks, but it makes sense. So you can have compassion for yourself on the rehab process afterwards. The same can be said about our mental skills and our mental health in general. If you find yourself in these low moments, it's going to be easy to beat yourself up over it first, being like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. But if you be honest with yourself, if you haven't done the work proactively, then yeah, no wonder like this didn't pan out the way that you thought it would. But also meet yourself with some grace in that. Have some compassion and say, okay, it's feedback. Feedback is never fatal. It's never final. It's just information forward from here. So we can then look at it and say, okay, yeah, if I didn't, like I said earlier, I've written like through half of journal in the past month alone. Well, guess what? I didn't write in that journal for the first like 4 or 5 months of this year. And I just had life circumstances kind of come into my life that hit me over the head with like a ton of bricks and made me realize, oh shoot, like I'm not all good. I wasn't doing the things that I say I and know that actually helped me. Like I hadn't been to therapy and counseling for a little while. I hadn't been journaling. I hadn't been spending time in prayer and just doing all these things that I know for me personally, I've found has been a formula for success. into being that proactive work. And so now it's like, okay, now I need to, like, I'm in training camp again. I'm in that like preseason. All right, I need not dig myself out of a hole, but I'm prepping myself to come back better, to come back in a position where it's like, okay, yeah, if that didn't work, there's truth in that. I can meet myself humbly with that truth and say, that's on me. That's on me. And I can give myself grace in permission to go and do the work now. Not from a place of I'm not enough, not from a place of continue to beat myself up and it's a form of punishment, but from a place of actual motivation and inspired, like wanting to be better. And that's the, I would say, like the unlocking key for so many athletes and so many humans in general. It's not just restricted to athletes, but if you can master that art of 100% truth with yourself, not this toxic positivity BS that exists out in our world, but be real with yourself. And in the same breath, have grace with yourself. As you walk forward, your performance comes from a very different place.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, this has been so good. I'm going to wrap it up because I know we could go on forever. But the last question that I ask everyone on the podcast has to do with like what authentic performance is and kind of our goals. So I'm curious, what does it look like for you to live authentically?
Such a good question. I think it's a way, for me now, it is living in a way that honors God, that allows his work to be done through how I show up, whatever it is that I'm doing. It's providing and showing up in a way that is true excellence and recognizing that that doesn't mean it has to be perfect, but there has to be intentional effort behind what it is that I'm doing. It's not half-assing something and just showing up to mail it in and go through the motions. But it's, okay, I'm here, I'm present. How can I honor him in the way that I'm showing up in this moment? And going from there. And it's just dropping out of my head and dropping into my heart and trusting that if I'm playing from here, I have faith that things will be okay. I don't have to know the outcome. And in fact, when you don't know the outcome, that's, I think, where true peak performance comes from, where the outcome is not guaranteed, but you have faith in the unknown and you feel safe enough to go risk it and go do it and try anyway. And that's just been the driving factor for me for so long now. It's just, how do I continue to tap back into that? And what I've found to help me is having that actually written out somewhere and reverting back to it before I show up in these bigger things. So whether it's before showing up as a podcast host or as a guest or going even to just post a story on Instagram, how do I make sure that I'm recentering with that true version of self and allow that to be what shows up?
I love that. Such a good answer. Well, thank you so much for being here. I just know that someone's going to be blessed by this conversation. So I'm so grateful that you take the time out of your day to show up for other athletes, whoever is listening. It means a lot. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nat. This was a lot of fun. Again, I appreciate being on the other side of things. So just really grateful and blessed for the opportunity to sit here with you today. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was so good. So good. I mean, again, we could continue on for so long. You have so much wisdom, but just glad to get a little snippet of that.
Maybe we'll do a part 2 down the road.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We would love to hear what you found valuable in this episode. So please DM us on Instagram at Authentic Performance or leave a review. They're super, super helpful for us. We're so thankful that you're on this journey with us and want to invite you to be a part of the Authentic Performance fam. You can check out more of how we're supporting athletes at theauthenticperformance.com. Also, let us know what you want to hear on the podcast next or who you want to hear. We appreciate your feedback and want to give you the best possible resources and support. In the meantime, think about how you can live authentically. See you next time.